Welcome to episode 45 of the Tax Professionals podcast. Jennie Brown joins us for episode 5 of the Tax Career Success Secret series, where high-achieving tax professionals share the secrets behind career success.
Welcome to the Tax Professionals podcast, the podcast dedicated to helping you improve your tax career. Here's your host, Jack Bonehill.
Jennie is a CTA qualified tax partner at Streets Chartered Accountants and became partner at the young age of 35. She has worked in both personal tax and corporation tax, but now focuses purely on personal tax, which is where her passion lies. Based on the time I spent with Jennie, one of her clear strengths is caring for, nurturing and supporting her team. She places great importance on this, and she shares her approach and philosophy in this episode. From our conversation, you will hear about Jennie's career and why she chose to specialise in personal tax over corporation tax, how she dealt with what she felt like was a lack of training early in her career which resulted in her almost leaving the profession, Jennie's approach to nurturing and building her team and taking advantage of everyone's strengths, what Jennie thinks contributed most to becoming a partner at age 35 and experience of being one so far, and standout advice that Jennie received and advice she would give to her younger self knowing what she knows now. The timings for each of these sections can be found in the show notes at thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/TTPP45 or in the details section of the episode in your podcast player. Make sure you don't miss out on any future episodes of the podcast by subscribing or signing up for email notifications at thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/subscribe. The email notifications will give you a brief summary of each episode so that you can decide if you want to listen. Episodes are bi-weekly and are released on Mondays. Just before we get into the episode, I want to mention this. When I graduated, my first job choice was to be an actuary, with working in tax as a close second. And even though I've enjoyed all my tax roles, it wasn't until I became CTA qualified that I decided tax was where I wanted to stay. With tax, there's so many different roles and places to work. They all provide something a bit different. And while that's great, it's meant I've spent a lot of time thinking about what areas of tax I want to work in and where I want to take my career long term. I've been caught up in my own thoughts. I've had doubts. I've been unsure. What's been most useful for me is talking to others, saying what I'm thinking, having someone listen, and hearing their advice. The tax recruitment company understands this and can help you with a free career coaching chat with them. They have over 60 years experience in the sector. They can help you explore the options. They can help you decide what's best for you. And they can help you to create a plan to transform your tax career, making you feel more content and happier in your life. You can book a free, no obligation call with them by heading on over to thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/free career chat. That's thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/free career chat. Thanks to the tax recruitment company for sponsoring the podcast, which is helping me to continue creating episodes. Without further ado, let's get into the episode. So just to start off for us today then, Jennie, could you tell us a little bit about you and your tax career?
Yes, so I started pretty much fresh from school, actually, joined Grant Thornton, and I was there for about 10 years, working across the private client and corporation tax teams. And while I was at Grant Thornton, I requested a move to the corporate tax team, having spent 5 years in private client. And that was largely to help broaden my knowledge and support the CTA exams. I thought it was really important. You're applying a lot of theory when you're doing your exams, and I felt it was really important to understand how you actually apply that in practice, and vice versa. Applying it in practice made more sense of the theory. So I definitely found that helped sort of when doing my CTA exams. I think I knew corporate tax wasn't really for me, and it wasn't an area I wanted to specialise in. But as I say, I thought it was helpful with my exams. And I thought it was helpful so early on in my career to kind of not make a decision so early on that corporate tax wasn't the right area for me, and just try it out first. But I'm definitely glad I went into corporation tax for the number of years I did. I was there for about 5 years as well, because I think now when specialising in private client, obviously a lot of clients are business owners. So you can't really just put the business aspect in one box and the personal position in another. I think to give the right advice and holistic advice, you've got to look at everything in the round. So I found that was really really helpful to get that experience. And then after about 10 years at Grant Thornton, I moved over to Haynes Watts. And that really enabled me to step into a more managerial position. It was a really exciting time when I joined the region that I joined at Haynes Watts, because the firm was really growing. It was looking to grow and create a lot more structure. So that gave me the opportunity to create a personal tax team and a personal tax and private client department. And in doing that, it was a pretty steep learning curve from the skills that I needed to have developed. Whilst I was at Grant Thornton, I had great training and I obtained all my qualifications. But when I moved to Haynes Watts and took on that managerial position, I had to learn a lot of other skills, so being, commerciality and people management, which were both sort of crucial to the success of that department and team. It was a real steep learning curve. And I think, unlike sort of with the technical side of our jobs, you can do exams and you can read a book, and there's lots of resources out there to be able to improve and gain that technical knowledge. With some of these other skills, commerciality and getting the best out of people and kind of being able to make more decisive decisions, they weren't things you could just go home or go on to an hour webinar and then know. So it was a really steep learning curve, but I think that was really crucial and really important part of my career, because it helped me to build those skills. And when I was at Haynes Watts, I was nominated to go on the firm's Leadership Trust programme, which really helped enhance some of those skills, and to be around others in a similar position where we were kind of all supporting each other. I then went on to become a shareholder and director at Haynes Watts and head up the whole private client team. And then sort of the third stage of my career, I guess, where I am now, after nearly 6 years at Haynes Watts, I moved onto Streets, where I am now. And I felt at this stage in my career, I kind of built a good technical knowledge. I developed a lot of the other skills, commercial and leadership skills. And I guess I felt I'm now in a position where I feel quite comfortable in my ability and my strengths and know what I can bring to a business. So when I joined Streets a couple of years ago, it was quite a nice position. As I say, I kind of felt comfortable in my ability. So as I say, I joined Streets 2 years ago as a tax partner, primarily specialising in private client and trying to help grow the business. And in the 2 years I've been with Streets, interesting timing, because I joined just before the pandemic, which was a bit nerve-wracking. But in the 2 years since I've been with Streets, I've helped open our Northants office and our Luton office. So even in a really short space of time, in the middle of pandemic, there's been lots of growth, which has been really exciting.
Yeah, you've said a few things there that I think are quite interesting. I just want to dig down a little bit deeper into. The first one was when you said kind of you got your first managerial position, and there's kind of a lot of new skills and stuff to learn there. And you mentioned leadership and people management and commerciality. You did say that you had this leadership program as well, but kind of how did you go about developing these skills and getting them to the level where they needed to be at?
I think, it's like I say, it's a difficult one, because it's not, as tax advisors, as accountants, we all focus on being the best in tax and being able to give the best tax advice, or being the best accountant, the best accountancy advice. But it's such a different area. And I even think, going back 6 years, 7 years or so, when I was in this position, I think even now the profession is talking about these other skills a lot more. I think when I was kind of in this area, it was just starting, I think, to become more apparent that as tax advisors and accountants, we needed help with these other skills. So the leadership trust program was really helpful to help guide and highlight. But it also boiled down, I think for me, it's probably two things: surrounding yourself with the right people professionally, people in a similar situation with similar ambitions and goals, that you could help sort of coach each other, and coach each other, not tell each other the answer, but help each other to actually, make your own decisions and get to that point yourself. But also sort of investing in your own self-development. I, whilst invest a lot of time in technical webinars and seminars, I did and still very much do invest a lot of time in my own self-development. So whether that's certain books and webinars within that area, or I'm part of a group where we discuss different topics every month, and they are all aspects such as imposter syndrome, how to be decisive, using your experience to help form your judgment. So I think also it is just experience, and I think it's looking around you and looking at other within all aspects of your life, looking at people who are respected and they're leaders, whether that's in the family or within the profession, and you can kind of see who has respect for them and who leads them, if they're decisive. And I think it's just a mixture of all those things, kind of pulling them together to kind of help build your own plan of how you're going to develop those skills.
Yeah, it's because they nowadays, anyway, at least they are very important, aren't they? And I think some of the things that have worked best for me is almost like acknowledging that experience plays a part, but also like a bit of trial and error with stuff. And I tend to get like my ideas from like reading books or speaking to other people and stuff, and then you can kind of like build the approach that works for you in relation to those skills. But it's a very important area, isn't it, to definitely focus on, as well as the technical side for tax.
Yeah, and I think like the technical side for tax, no one's ever going to know everything about tax, but I think it's this. So we're always kind of continuing to learn, keep up to date with our CBD. I think it's the same with those skills. Even when you become a partner, it doesn't stop. You have to kind of keep on top of both areas. And as I say, even within the pandemic, I've continued to go on courses and meet with groups, and more recently been able to physically go to workshops where we discuss all of these other aspects. And I think all of that is so helpful when you're growing a team as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So you did mention as well that you got some experience in corporation tax, I think, when you were at Grant Thornton, did you say? So kind of
Yes.
How did you decide then that, private client was actually for you over corporation tax? What kind of helped you to make that decision?
I think for me, it was a very personal decision. And I think, if I'm honest, I think private client tax suits me better as an individual in terms of my personality. I think it wasn't necessarily a case of that I'm better at the private client tax than the corporate tax from a technical perspective. I think it was more, it suited my personality. And I think when something suits you and it's a strength, then you're automatically better at it. So it's kind of like it goes round in a circle. But for me, it just suits my personality. I really enjoy meeting people. And importantly, I like to talk, but I really enjoy listening. And I think that's crucial within private client with families, being able to sit and listen and take on and understand their problems and concerns to ultimately help them find solutions. I think as well with private client, you're quite often dealing with a lot more emotive and personal discussions with death and divorce, and ultimately a lot more, it's sort of all surrounding, it's all around the family. And again, I think that's a very different conversation than some of the conversations you'd have in dealing with a corporate entity and a business and how that's operating. I think for me, it was more sort of suited my personality and how I enjoy working with clients.
Yeah, I think when you, as you say, really, when you're working with like individuals, it's much more personal than when you like advising a corporate, because you've got kind of their family and all the other things that are going into it as well. It just makes it feel like you're making more of a difference maybe when you're giving that advice.
Yeah, I think for me as well, and maybe this was a slightly skewed approach on it because I was junior at the time, but when I was in the corporate team going out with the audit department and we were dealing with businesses, quite often we weren't dealing with the business owners, we were dealing with the business's accounts team. Now, obviously, I appreciate had I been a corporate tax partner at that point, probably would have been involved more directly with the business owners, but actually not necessarily, because obviously a lot of the large corporate entities, even as a partner, you might not always or frequently be speaking to the business owner. And for me, I felt I'm less able to engage directly with the person who influences that business and makes the decisions. Whereas with the private client side of things, I'm sat down with the family directly. And I can more visibly see the impact I'm having or the impact the situation's having and how I can try and alleviate the stresses that they're under.
Yeah, it's a good point actually about kind of the companies when you're talking to like their accounts team or someone else. And obviously when it comes to like listed companies, the biggest companies out there, there isn't a single owner, is there? So you will never ever speak to that. And to be honest, actually, sometimes with the big companies, it can be frustrating trying to get anything through because there's so much bureaucracy and people that decisions need to go through. It feels like you're getting nowhere for ages.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, with the personal side, it can obviously be a lot more emotive. So, conversations, meetings can be quite heated between families, depending on the situation. So that's another aspect to it. But yeah, I think with the private client side, it just, again, as I say, it kind of just suited my personality and sort of ability to show empathy and help support them.
Yeah. So kind of before we had this conversation, one of the things that you mentioned to me was that early on in your career, that you had some challenges with what you felt was kind of lack of training and support to help you develop. And kind of the work that you were doing wasn't at the level that you'd wanted it to be at, and having some strong feedback from colleagues, etc. I think a lot of people probably have felt like this at some point in their career. So I think it'd be nice to just kind of tell us a bit about this experience and how you dealt with it and overcome it.
Yeah, it was interesting kind of revisiting this when we were speaking earlier and thinking about it. And as you say, unfortunately, quite a few people, and probably most of us, and maybe more than once, have had this in our careers. It was effectively at the time I moved to the corporation tax department to get some more experience. I mean, as I mentioned, it wasn't necessarily, it was the area I knew that I didn't really want to focus on. I kind of did it for the reasons of helping with my exams. So possibly in my head, I was already on the back foot. But at the time, I was first day in the department and I was sent out with the audit team to look after quite a big group of companies. And I sat with the auditors and said to them, what am I doing? So I was really thrown in at the deep end. And as the weeks and years sort of rolled on, there wasn't a massive amount of support. Interestingly, looking at it now, obviously at the time I was very upset. At the time I actually thought about coming out of the professional together and doing something different. So it did have a big impact on me. But I think looking at it now, and to a degree I did at the time, I looked around me and I thought there's 2 or 3 senior corporate partners, managers here who are really, really good at what they do, but they weren't very good at leading and nurturing a team. And I think that comes back to the point that we've sort of talked about before, is that within the profession, we're all striving to be, we're all trained from the beginning to be a good tax advisor or a good accountant, but there's so many other skills that we need. And, rolling back 40, 50 years, those sort of skills weren't even, discussed. So some of the leaders of the team I was in at the time, they probably never had any conversations about these other areas. They'd possibly thrown into managing people when they didn't even want to. So I kind of was aware of that then, and especially am now. But obviously at the time it did, as I say, I did contemplate coming out of the professional together, and it did pull me down. I'm someone who works hard, and I I want to do the best I can. So it was demotivating. And I did speak up. And again, at the time, I'm fairly shy anyway, and especially back then at the beginning of my career. But I think I knew I was doing all I possibly could, and I knew I was working hard, and I spoke up. And some aspects changed enough to get me through a few years of having experience in that area, then knowing that I reverted back to the private client team and then moved on to Haynes Watts anyway. But I think, I think I possibly could have spoken up more at the time, but I think I knew that it actually wasn't anybody's fault. As I say, I think it was more people have been put into that position of looking after a team when they possibly hadn't even chosen to do that.
Mm-hmm. So what would you say then kind of helped you get the motivation back and to kind of stick at working in tax rather than, I suppose, look for a different career?
I think I'm probably quite stubborn and determined, and I'm very hard on myself. So I think for me, because I'm hard on myself, I will happily tell myself when something's not working. And I was telling myself, I'm doing my exams, I'm passing my exams, I'm getting on well with clients. This is working, it's not me. So I guess being sort of true to myself. And as I say, looking at the situation, thinking this isn't me, it's actually more, obviously taking responsibility where if there were areas that were my responsibility. But in this situation, it was more, as I say, the setup. So I think I thought to myself, don't let it deter you. It isn't it isn't a fault with you. Try and plow through, get as much as you can from this situation. You don't want to be in corporate tax forever. So just take what you can from it, learn from who you can. Obviously, being in corporate tax, I was out and about with the auditors. So I learned quite a lot on the auditing side as well. And I thought, just take what I can from it. And then when the time comes and I've done that, I can then move on. Yeah.
Good. So as part of this, then I think you had some kind of difficult feedback. Obviously, when it comes to feedback, we all love to have something that's positive, don't we? And telling us that we've done a good job. But sometimes, obviously, where things don't go so well, we get some constructive and maybe even sometimes negative feedback. How is it that you, I suppose, deal with receiving feedback then now to make sure that you can get something useful out of it rather than seeing it as a negative?
Yeah, I think for me, whenever I get sort of negative feedback or feedback you don't want to hear, my reaction isn't defensive. So I don't kind of get angry and defensive and sort of try and argue that's not the case. I'm almost the other side of the coin. I will take it on board and be quite negative and sort of beat myself up over it. So again, I had to be quite sort of strong in myself to think, I'm only a few years into tax. I've not been doing this for very long. I'm in a department where I haven't had the best support in helping me to understand. I mean, it was actually around deferred tax at the time, which isn't the simplest of areas of tax anyway. And, funnily enough, talk about it now with other partners. And, some people still say, God, I still can't get my head around that. And so I think it was quite a technical point to have been thrown into without anyone really talking it through and explaining it to me. So, yeah, I think trying to think, well, yeah, I know this is an area that I'm struggling with. I know that. So how am I going to sort of overcome that? Which was, as I say, it was just to try and learn from who I could, read into it and research it myself. And I think also, as I say, because I knew I wanted to go into private clients, I knew it was important for me to understand what it was, but I knew I didn't need to understand it to the degree I perhaps would if I was going to be within corporation tax. But as I say, I was only a few years into tax, and I think I just tried to be kind to myself in that a few years into tax, you're never going to know everything. That is the period where you are learning, so it's okay.
Yeah, no, it absolutely is. It's hard, isn't it? Because a lot of people as well, I don't know if this was the same for you, but a lot of people come straight out of university and go into like a tax job and they've got like 2 1s and firsts, and No, they're obviously thinking that they're smart and can do the job well, but I think they probably underestimate how difficult it actually is in those first few years, because it's not just about knowing the right tax answer, is it? Or even if it is, sometimes it's a really complicated area of tax law, and there might not even be a right or wrong answer. So it can be really hard, can't it, to, I suppose, appreciate that early on in your career. It sounds like it was good that you did acknowledge that kind of at the right time, so then you could stick with it.
Yeah, and the thing is as well, tax isn't always, it doesn't sound logical sometimes, especially something like deferred tax. It is quite difficult to get your head around it from just a practical, logical perspective. But I mean, I joined Grant Thornton straight from school, so that possibly didn't help me either, because everybody around me had been to university, and I thought, oh, it's me, I don't get it because I'm not as intelligent as everyone else. I've not been to university, but it was the situation, and it was the lack of support. And, doing my exams, the personal tax exams when I've been in personal tax, I was really confident with that. And then coming down to work in corporation tax, and then work on the corporation tax exams, which I hadn't started to study for. I just hadn't had any exposure to it at all. And as I say, with the best will in the world, you can go home and read, but you sometimes need someone to sit you down and explain it in a very sort of just clear, simplistic way.
Yeah And the thing is as well, with no context, when you just read stuff, it's hard to make sense of it, especially when you look at some pieces of legislation and there's lots of ifs and buts, and unless you know what the exact fact is and you can follow it through, it's almost impossible to understand until you've got a scenario to apply it to.
Yeah.
So what would you say then are kind of the main takeaways from this experience, looking back at it now in hindsight?
I think, as I say, I think being sort of true to yourself. I think if evaluating the situation and trying to be objective, I think it's easy, it's not great to get sort of negative feedback. It's not great to not feel like you're supported, and naturally, whether it's subconsciously or externally, you can feel very emotional about it, especially if you care and this is your career. But I think trying to be objective about it and level-headed, and as I say, even if it's a testing part of your career and journey, I think trying to push through it and rather than seeing it as a horrible place that you're in at the moment that's kind of causing you a bit of upset, try to just see it as one of the stepping stones in your journey, and that you'll come out the other side of that. And I think for me, a big takeaway is how I felt at that time. I would never allow one of my team members to feel like that moving forward. So it's longer term, it's hopefully made me become a better leader of a team.
Yeah, so I think that leads quite well on actually into the next kind of topic I want to talk about then, because you said one of the areas where you think you've got a biggest strength is in kind of developing and supporting staff, and it sounds like that's really stemmed from or being driven by how you felt and how you were treated early on in your career around this. So I suppose what is your ethos, mindset and approach then around now supporting and developing staff that kind of drives your actions when it comes to this?
Well, yeah, and I think whilst I had that experience as well, I think I can sometimes, it's been commented, I can be quite quiet in a meeting, but I'm not quiet, not engaged. I'm actually listening and observing what's happening around me. And I think I've always done that, even if you're going shopping and you're looking at how one of the supervisors is talking to somebody and how people interact with each other. I've always quite enjoyed sort of absorbing that and taking it in generally. I think that's made my approach to kind of trying to build and lead a team. I think it's quite simple, really, my approach. Generally, I just want to nurture the team so that we build trust and respect with each other, and that we can be very open. I mean, obviously, a business needs to make money. There are so many technical rules that we're trying to keep up to date with. We've got constant deadlines. It's such a pressured environment within the accountancy and tax profession that we have to have good relationships across the team. We're at work a lot of our lives. So I think I also try to be really inclusive with the team. I try to give them as much information about the firm, the targets, the direction the firm is going, obviously as much as I possibly can. I'm honest if something's gone wrong. And I encourage the team to be open with any ideas they have to improve things we can do better, because I think it's important that they feel part of the business and feel part of the growth, as opposed to feeling like they're simply being told what to do and dictated at. Most of us, we need our own driver and we want to belong and feel part of something. So by being inclusive and kind of letting everybody know what we're all working towards, I think is really important. I try not to sort of focus on hierarchy. I think that's something I've witnessed in the past. I'm the partner, you'll do as I say. I think for me, it's not important that the team respect me as a partner. They respect me as another human being, and we all respect each other. And it might seem quite idealistic, and my team often refer to me as mother hen, but ultimately it's just about trying to get the best out of all of us. And I think having a real mix of personalities and skill sets within a team is really important. As we said before, we've all got strengths, we've all got weaknesses, and if everybody can play to their strengths, and everybody's got slightly different strengths, personalities and skill sets, it means there's room for everybody to grow and develop in the areas they're good at and make them feel good.
Yeah, it's an interesting approach, because I kind of have the same ethos as you, in that I want to really help staff to develop and progress themselves. But I think the area where I find it hardest is I'm naturally not a person that kind of dishes out lots of compliments. Like my mum and dad would joke if I say anything that's like slightly complimentary, and I know that's a flaw in my character in terms of helping staff. And I kind of focus more on the constructive points that I think can help them to improve. Yeah. But it's kind of trying to get that balance more right, because I personally, for me, I'm definitely more skewed in the constructive feedback section, much more than the positive stuff. Because obviously if all you're getting is constructive feedback all the time, then I suppose you feel like you're doing a bad job and it must not be nice. So I'm trying to work on that myself at the moment.
It is a tricky balance. And I think as you progress through your career and you're more experienced and confident, that constructive feedback, you can take a lot easier, because actually you want to progress. But I think in the earlier years, when somebody's at the beginning and they might not be as confident, it's trying to strike that balance of the type of feedback that they get. Yeah, it's difficult.
It is. I think you can point out stuff as well that might seem small to you, but could still be big to someone else. Something as simple as the document looks professional. If they prepared something to go to a client, does it look nice? Most people will produce something that looks nice. So that's a positive, isn't it, straight away? Anything else as well. I'm just trying more and more to do that now, because as I say, I know for me, I do point out the constructive stuff more so, but I do it genuinely out of trying to help people.
Yes, yeah.
But I'm working on it. So did you have any particular role models that's kind of helped you with developing this kind of approach to developing staff, or any opposites of role models, or most people you've watched that you think, I'm definitely not going to do that?
Yeah, I think potentially on a level that impacted me and that I was closely linked to, I possibly saw more of what I wouldn't be, what I wouldn't want to be. So I possibly saw more leaders and partners acting in a way how I kind of then thought, right, I can see how they're acting and how their team are acting. So I don't want to, I want to be the opposite to that. So yeah, it was probably more, rather than role models I'd aspired to, it was more role models, sort of leaders I learned from. I did, when I was at Grant Thornton at the time, there were a couple of leaders who, whilst I wasn't directly involved with, obviously they were a huge part of the firm, and how they inspired the business was, that they were aspirational to me. It was Sasha Romanovich and Francesca Lagerberg. I remember at the time I was sort of training, they were very inspirational to me. And also a fellow colleague who who joined the corporate department and actually was very helpful. And we did our exams together. Kate Rothwell, she's gone on to do great things in tax and very inspirational in her field. So there were definitely role models along the way and other people that I worked with, but I'd possibly say on balance, it was more those I'd learnt how their team reacted was not how I wanted to become, sort of evolve into a leader.
Yeah, because really I think you can probably learn more actually about how not to do things from people, because they kind of stick in your head more, don't they, when they don't agree with you or you don't like the approach. I've definitely done the same as you. Kate is actually going to come on the podcast shortly as well. So we get to hear her inspirational approach.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So for you personally then, what would you say are your like less strong areas, and how do you like compensate for this day to day?
So on a general level, although it is important to this, to probably all sectors, but kind of the whole area of IT and technology, I absolutely am trying to ensure we embrace it. It's crucial for the development of tax and driving efficiency, but I like the end product, but I don't have the attention span of learning all the software as to how I need to get there. So yeah, my attention span when it comes to sort of technology and software is pretty poor. I'm really lucky that the colleague I work with, who's the corporate tax partner, he's really hands-on and really enjoys the IT side of things. And I really enjoy the staffing side of things and looking after the team. So actually, we complement each other really well. But I'd say confidence in general is probably been my weakness. The whole imposter syndrome has probably prevented me from utilising as many opportunities as I could. And again, I've really tried to invest in that over the last 18 months, especially during the pandemic. It's been a tough time for everybody. So I've really tried to kind of maintain, invest in time in self-development during the pandemic. Public speaking is my big sort of elephant in the room. I'm terrified of public speaking, and I've always been really worried this will hold me back in my career. Ironically, when I was with Haynes Watts, I did most of the public speaking. I presented the budget seminars, and I kind of just got on with it. And again, I've done the same at Streets, but I want to enjoy it more. So again, that's another area that I really tried to invest. And obviously having a little bit more time during the pandemic and not being able to do the public speaking sort of face to face is giving me a bit of time to try and work on that. But I think where Streets have been great is I've just been really open and honest about that. I think everywhere I've worked before, I've never told anybody, and I've kept that to myself. And I promised myself when I joined Streets that I'd be honest about it, and they've been really supportive. And I think actually it's sort of, one of those things. Actually, when you tell somebody, you feel a lot less. It doesn't seem such a stressful issue. So yeah, that's something that I'm going to try my hardest to carry on. Sort of working at. But I think also, sort of like we said before, we all have strengths, we all have weaknesses. If it's something I can't overcome, then I can't, but I'm going to try my hardest to do what I can to at least say, well, I tried.
Yeah, I really like the kind of honesty approach, actually, in terms of what you said there around telling Streets that kind of public speaking is something that you find more difficult and stuff. I think a lot of people think that being honest around those things is like a sign of weakness, but yeah, I actually think it's the opposite. I think it's a sign of strength to acknowledge that, then almost let people know, so then they can help you and give you whatever it is, the support that you need to get better at it.
Yeah, definitely. And again, it's one of those things that I think that in itself is an area that quite a lot of people, if they're honest, they probably say they feel exactly the same. So I think me telling people, being honest with people, actually meant other people were honest about it as well. And I think it actually helped us all feel a bit more comfortable around this area. But as I say, I'm going to try and overcome it. And I have and do a lot of public speaking, but I'd like to be able to enjoy it, because I do really enjoy my job. So, and my role, and tax, there's always, every day's a school day. There's so much to learn. So I really enjoy that and communicating it to my team. So it'd be great if I could overcome this. So we'll see.
Yeah, I think there's an element of just the longer you do it, or the more you've done it, the less difficult and the less nervous you'll become. I remember, like, early on in my career, actually, I used to feel really nervous before saying something in like a client meeting, just in case it was like out of place or wrong, etc. But looking at what I'm like now, I can't believe that I used to feel like that. But that's because I've now done it lots of times. I know it's okay to say stuff, and even if I do say something wrong, it doesn't really matter. So just kind of that timeline of the progression, and just knowing that the practice helps, and even just the experience, the time of experience does help, doesn't it, with those things as well?
Yeah, definitely. And it's funny because it's human nature. We're public speaking, when you're worried about it, you're thinking about everybody's so focused on what you're doing or you're saying, and actually they're not. So it's almost sort of, don't have such quite a high opinion of yourself. People aren't going to notice like you think they're going to notice. If you flip it over when you're in an audience and you're listening, you're not looking at the person all the time. You're looking around the room and down at the floor, and so it's actually been quite an interesting one to get some support with, because it's quite sort of interesting how the mind works, actually, which has also helped with other topics leading back into sort of how to look after a team and things that the team may be thinking and struggling with. So it's been quite helpful for kind of how the team may feel about these things in the future for themselves as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Just a reminder that you can book a free career coaching chat with the Tax Recruitment Company by heading on over to thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/free career chat. The Tax Recruitment Company can help you decide what's best for you and your career. I mean, you're obviously quite humble about this, because you haven't mentioned it at all so far, but you did become a partner at a young age. I think you said 35 earlier when we were speaking before this.
Yes.
So what is it that you kind of did that you think personally contributed the most to being able to achieve this?
Yeah, I think it's as humans, we can be quite tough on ourselves, can't we? Because actually, when you've said that and other people have said it, I think to myself, well, it's not a massive achievement, and I'm 35. I wanted to be a partner at 30, and I think that's it. We're quite tough on ourselves. It's never enough, never good enough. So yeah, I think as I said to you when we spoke before this, I found it feels quite odd to be talking about myself and not talking about tax. But I think ultimately for me, it's just sheer determination and drive. I think it's probably, again, a sort of personality trait. I think through all aspects of our life, we might be fortunate to have some really good people to guide and support us, or, as we've discussed, sort of learn from. But I think with our careers, perhaps like other things in life, I think it comes down to that inner drive to be reliant on yourself. And you've got all these different challenges going through. You might not pass an exam first time. You might not be getting support off of somebody. But it's kind of having that self-reliance and drive to kind of own and be accountable for taking forwards your career.
Yeah. And because obviously you're still, I suppose, fairly new into being a partner so far. So I just think it's interesting to understand, I suppose, has being a partner lived up to your expectations, or has it like been completely off the mark?
Yeah, absolutely. It was a huge milestone for me that I wanted to work towards. Not about necessarily about it being the title. It's about kind of what it means. I guess almost it's a little bit as well in terms of sort of the past experience I'd had, and when I was at Haynes Watts, I had a lot of responsibility. I was a director there, so obviously there has been a change. But I think it's almost like some people, how they would describe getting married. The relationship hasn't really changed, but there's almost a commitment there, and that's kind of how I felt. It's that kind of almost commitment myself to my career and that milestone And obviously, there's still a lot as a partner that I have to, I want to learn and grow. And as a partner through Streets, obviously there's different stages and levels within that partnership. So there's loads for me to continually learn and progress with. But I think having had those sort of leadership positions previously, it was sort of the move was more of a commitment of all, or a milestone of all of that work in the past has kind of got me to here. And now I'm a partner because of all of that work in the past. But this is like a new phase. It's almost like right now I'm proving myself as a partner. And as I say, that might come in many different levels in the future as I work at Streets.
Yeah, what is it that you've liked the most, do you think, about being a partner for Streets?
I think, again, as I sort of said, helping, sort of inclusion for me is really important. And I really enjoy what I do, and I'm really driven. So to be able to make a difference, and as I sort of described, I want everybody in the business to be able to make a difference, regardless of what level. But naturally, when you're at a partner level, you do have more influence, and you can help make decisions. And obviously, I've not wanted to come in like a bull in a china shop and tell everybody what to do. But it's just great to think I've joined a really successful, long-established firm where there's a mixture of lots of different people, in all different levels of the business. But I can kind of come, and I've got experience in working at a large firm, 2 large firms, some smaller firms at stages, and it's kind of, at that stage, I think, where I can bring all this experience to the table, and I can help the future growth of the business with all this experience. So I think it's great to be in that position where I can be with the other partners and have my input and help shape the future of Streets, especially across sort of the tax area of the business is something that I've really enjoyed so far. Obviously, we've been in a pandemic, which hasn't meant I'm able to have, even physically seen some of the people that I work with as frequently as I would like. But moving forwards, it would be great to be a part of sort of shaping the future of the business.
So kind of on the flip side then, what would you say has been like the most difficult elements of transitioning to partner for you, or something that you found harder than you expected?
I think the biggest difficulty is just the number of plates that you have to spin, the number of hats that you have to wear as a partner. I'm very hands-on. I deliver a lot of the advisory work myself. I'm training the team technically. I'm trying to help them develop in other areas as well. I'm really involved, and I really enjoy. We do a lot of podcasts on different areas of tax. We do a lot of blogs and articles and presentations, which I really enjoy getting involved with. We've obviously got billing targets. We've obviously got recoveries. I think it's just the amount of plates that you're trying to spin, new business coming in. I really enjoy going out with our BD team and winning new business. That's something wherever I've worked really closely with the BD and marketing team. That's just an aspect of it I've really enjoyed. So I think it's just the sheer number of plates you've got to keep spinning, and making sure you keep them all spinning is probably the biggest challenge.
Yeah, because I suppose really actually as a partner, you almost effectively run a mini business for your team, and kind of, are solely responsible for making sure that part of the business is running as it should be. Yeah,
that's it.
So is there any particular piece of advice that you were given kind of earlier on in your career that really kind of stood out to you? And if there is, could you tell us a little bit about this?
Again, I think I probably learned more from people in a way of what not to do. But thinking about sort of obviously all the past experience of different places I've worked, I think for me personally, sort of just get on with it, just do it, which might seem quite assertive, but it was said in a really positive way, like, you can do this, just get on with it. That was really good for me, because at first I did take it as a little bit, that's a bit harsh. But actually, I'm a dweller and I overthink, which I think overthinking is probably not uncommon in tax, because in tax we're generally perfectionists, because we have to be, because we have to get the solution, it has to be correct. So we tend to be perfectionists, and as a result, we tend to read over things and check things, which we need from a technical point of view. But I think when we're looking at leadership and all the skills we need to have in terms of making decisions and judgment and how we look after the team, actually, I found some of those skills you need from a technical point of view, if I wasn't careful, they were going to hold me back in being commercial and leading my team. So I think kind of get on with it, or, you can do it, actually kind of was always stuck with me. And I think, I'm not sure where I heard this from, and I think this is probably people have heard this before, but I think if you made a mistake or you failed an exam or something, I think to imagine you were someone else and that person was in your situation, what would you say to them? If you kind of said that out loud, what you'd say to them, you'd probably say really kind, supportive things. And then you take a step back and think, right, what have you been telling yourself? If you failed an exam, you've probably been giving yourself a really hard time, or I shouldn't have gone out that weekend before. And whereas if you were talking to somebody else, you'd have probably said completely different things. So I think that's always been quite powerful, to kind of look at your situation and what would you say if it was someone in your team or a colleague or a friend. What would you say to just be more supportive? It's not to kind of brush away anything that you need to take responsibility for, but actually just to be a bit more supportive to yourself.
Yeah, I've never heard anyone actually say that before, but it's kind of true, isn't it? We're so much harsher on ourselves than we are when we're kind of advising other people. So to treat yourself as someone else and then give that advice, I can see how that could be really helpful.
Yeah, yes, definitely. I when I was thinking about it earlier, that sprung to mind, but I still can't quite remember where it came from, but I've always found that quite helpful.
Yeah, it is. And I think you're right as well, actually, about the kind of the perfectionist thing for people who work in tax, because I'm definitely like that. When you kind of, you're thinking for ages over each sentence, or where you're going to put a paragraph in a report or things like that, spend so much time doing things like that. I think when you move away from kind of the actual technical side of tax, as you say, that perfectionism can kind of hold you back a bit. You can't really apply the same approach to things like BD and talking to clients, because those things just don't go to plan. You cannot anticipate how a conversation is going to go, or whether a client's going to want to say yes to a piece of work or anything like that. So it doesn't really, you can't really apply the same approach, can you really? So it's good that you've obviously acknowledged that you got those two different approaches for different tasks almost.
That's it, and that's it. We need the perfectionism with the technical side, but other things, whether it's other aspects of our job, it sometimes is good enough. But is that good enough? Does it need to be perfect? Actually, if it's whatever you've done, if that's good, is that okay to then move on to the next task? So yeah, it's an interesting area.
Have you heard of the 80-20% rule before?
Yes.
Yeah, it's exactly that, isn't it? 20% of the effort gets 80% of the result. So do you need to put more effort in to get it to 100%, because it's an extra 80% effort? And is it going to reap any reward? It doesn't quite work out like that in practice, but it's just I think a useful thing to hold in mind, because you can spend an extra hour on something just tweaking a few words and stuff, but is the person reading it going to care or even notice the differences in what you've changed? Probably not in most cases.
Well, no, and I think when it comes to a long tax report, it usually doesn't get read anyway. You usually have to have a meeting. You usually have to have a meeting and talk it all through to help the clients understand it. So that's the irony sometimes as well with the tax side of things. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's so true, actually. And the thing is that the reason the report's there mainly is almost to cover your risks, to show that you've advised correctly. But then, as you say, the client probably rarely reads it all the way through, if they get past the exact summary.
Yeah.
So kind of looking back then now, knowing what you know now, if you were to give yourself a piece of advice right at the start of your tax career or early on, what do you think it would be?
I think thoughts that are coming to mind would be to take, especially early on in your career, to take every opportunity you can to learn within tax itself, whether that's secondments or exams. Don't pressure yourself at the beginning of your career to race up the ladder. If people around you are getting promoted, try not to focus on that. Try to focus on absorbing as much as you can to have a really strong platform to kind of then spring off from. I think the higher up the ladder you go, as we said, the more plates you've got to spin, and that it's more and more difficult to allocate that time to technical learning and more exams because there's so much to juggle. So I think at the beginning, really using every opportunity you can to get those exams so you've got a really good platform to build on. And I think focusing on your strengths and harnessing these, not to ignore any weaknesses. It's important to know that they're there and everybody has them. But the happier you are, and the more you enjoy what you do, the better you'll be at it. So if you've got strength, then there's nothing wrong with working on those, working on those more and harnessing those. And I think as we've kind of talked about, I think if you want to develop your career, I guess through the traditional route of kind of working up the ladder to become a partner, I think it's important to not overlook other skills outside of technical skills. You'll be far better as a leader and far more in demand if you're able to lead a team and effectively grow your own succession plan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really like the point you made actually about kind of focusing on building your tax knowledge almost early on in your career. Because as you say, when you get more senior, you don't have the time to do that anymore. I remember when I was like in my first few years, I had a lot of time to kind of sit there and really research around some topics when I was working on certain projects, and that massively helped me to build my tax knowledge to a point now that I'd probably say technical ability is probably my biggest strength. So I think, yeah, absolutely with you on that point. Focus on building that tax knowledge early on in your career, and it will set you up well for the rest of it.
Yeah, and I know it's easier said than done, and everybody's in different circumstances, but I think if you take a break between maybe ATT and CTA, etc., it can be really tricky to kind of get back into it. I mean, not from personal experience, I didn't, but I know others around me, and then they perhaps didn't go on to CTA, and then life's evolved, and it's tricky to do that. I mean, I wish I had done STEP after CTA because I really want to do that. And now, as I say, there's so many plates to spin. I'd like to try and make time to do it in the next year or two. But yeah, definitely not worrying about rushing through the promotions in the first few years, and just thinking of it as the foundation which the rest of your career sits off.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And actually, whilst like doing CTA isn't absolutely essential to work in tax, I think it gives you so much in terms of knowledge and skills as well. So, even from that perspective, I think it's a must to do if you're really serious about progressing your career.
Yeah, and it's like any exams, you're not necessarily going to then do every aspect of the areas covered in practice. But for me, I always think of it as it's that light bulb moment when you read something and you think, there's something I need to do. And that's because you studied it. So if you hadn't studied it, you wouldn't have had that light bulb moment. So you potentially could have got something wrong or overlooked something. So, and again, I think it's the same with exams. It's easier said than done, but it's trying not to think of them as their exams and their life or death. It's just trying your hardest and working towards them and thinking of them as another step in your career, and something that is going to help enhance and you become better at what you're doing, rather than sort of focusing on it as an exam that you must pass. It's trying to make it as enjoyable as you can, and trying to alleviate the pressure a little bit. But I know that's easier said than done.
It is, yeah. I mean, I think it's more because I've got a similar mentality, really. I think the exams are more about how much can I learn from this rather than I need to pass or fail it. Obviously, you want to pass it as well, but particularly CTA, I think the reason I did that wasn't to pass the exams; it was to set myself up with the knowledge and the skills to be a good tax advisor.
Yes, yeah, that's it.
Head to the show notes for this episode to find out further information about Jennie and also for links to other episodes of Tax Career Success Secrets with guests including Nimish Shah, CEO of Blick Rothenberg, and Peter Rainey, current president of the CIOT. You can access the show notes at thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/TTPP45. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe or sign up for email notifications to make sure you don't miss out on any future episodes. The emails will give you a brief summary of each episode, which are bi-weekly and are released on Mondays. But that's it for this episode. I hope you liked the episode and have taken away some useful points to help you to progress, develop and improve your tax career. Until next time.